Bonjour, bienvenue au Yukon. Hi there, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, Nancy. Nice to see. Hi, Anna Marie. Diane, missing you. It's I would like to welcome everyone to a place I have been dying to get back to for years now. So I am here, of course, up in Yukon or Yukon Territory or the Yukon. Lots of different names, but you will see that I am standing out right by the mighty Yukon River. This is one of Turtle Island, one of North America's great rivers. It starts south of me here. So I am about, I'm about 110 rail miles from Skagway, Alaska right now. So to get to Alaska from Yukon, the closest part, you drive south to British Columbia and then to Alaska. So I'm north of Alaska. I think that's sort of a fun little fact. Hi, Paula, nice to see you. So right here, if I switch this around, you're looking south. Now you will see white-capped peaks in the distance. We are May 14th, I guess. Technically, we had no night last night. There was twilight. Hiya, Karen. There was twilight, but not night. So I am 60.7 degrees north. Today, we are driving another almost 600 kilometers up to Dawson City. And Dawson City is, of course, the historic urban highlight of this place. So just a quick little bit of background. And then bonjour. Just a quick little sense of where I am and why I am. It's I've just of course finished a trip with our dear friend Diane in Vancouver. And so then a couple of friends came and met me and they wanted to take a trip. And I said, well, I only have really a week in May. And I just want to put it in a little bit of perspective. We could have gone to, hi Samantha, nice to see you. Yeah, well, Finn is home, but we could have gone to Hawaii for a week for less money than it cost us to come here. But I have been in love with the Yukon for years. I first worked up here it was either 99 or the year 2000. Spent a whole summer up in Alaska, Yukon. I've been here in the winter and I've been dying to come back. And during COVID, the entire territory was closed. So this territory is 474,000 square kilometers. Put that in perspective, Germany is about 375,000. So it's larger than Germany. It is home to 45,000 people. And here in the capital, there's a gull going by, which is quite fun. We're a long way from the ocean. Here in the capital, there are about 28,000 people. It has a very, very high level of education. There are 14 First Nations here. Totoni, you might have heard of. Gwich'in is a well-known name. Dene language groups, and then Tlingit, of course. Hi, Merle. So it's a fantastic bit of history. But of course, when we climb into the history of this area and say, today we're driving, like I say, 600 kilometers, we're going to stop and do hikes. I doubt I'll have much reception. I'll be interested. Hi, MB. I'll be interested to see because in the past when I used to work here, they used to be like those phone cards where you'd punch in. But my mobile phone is working just fine now at the moment. I just have to show you this sun. Again, the sun really doesn't set this time of year. So when we're up in Dawson City the next couple of nights, it doesn't even get to full twilight. So we will be about 200 kilometers south of the Arctic Circle. Now, if you live over in Scandinavia, that doesn't sound that odd to you. I'm really at the same latitude right now as you would be in Oslo, Stockholm. The difference is here, you're in a big continental system. So even though there is Arctic Ocean, Paula, this is a wonderful place to live. Hi, Justina. It is culturally incredibly diverse. It is bilingual, English and French. However, there are 14 First Nations, and of course, there's been a huge work towards furthering that. But the real story of modern Yukon, of course, is you have to talk about the gold rush, the old pilings in here. But like I say, and I have said this on record many times, if I left Banff, even though I've been lucky enough to travel the whole wide world, it's probably up here I would come live. Now, I can hear an airplane take you off. See, rolling mountains around here. And it's such a small airport, but you get all that sort of northern system. Now, people work, of course, for government a lot up here. It is a territory. It predates the provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan as a jurisdiction. There goes there. There's Air North take you off right up there. Yukon's airline, probably heading down to Vancouver as it goes south. So if I were to drive 1 hour, yeah, absolutely, Anna Marie, you learn so much from the elders up here. If I were to drive about an hour, hour and a half straight west on the Alaska Highway, I would be making my way to Kluane National Park. That is where Mount Logan is. And Mount Logan is the tallest mountain in Canada. You then carry on that road for hours more up through Burwash Landing, Destruction Bay to Beaver Creek, the most westerly community in Canada. That's where you cross the border into Alaska. So the Alaska Highway, the Alcan, was built during World War II, of course, as a way of getting armaments up to Alaska. So before that, and what's so relevant about our history here, 1896, George Carmack and his friends find gold up in the Klondike and the Dawson City area. And we say Klondike, and I will be up there tomorrow. I'll be up there tonight. And then starting in 1898, when the Great Rush comes in, they start to build because there was the White Pass or Dead Horse Trail, as they call it, from Skagway, Alaska. Remember, Skagway is straight down here, 110 miles, 180 kilometers, 2 hours drive, and you're down at the Port of Skagway, which is at the very top of the Lynn Canal, which is the longest canal in the world. I will be spending 2 days there. The cruise ships will be in, so we will hide out from then. And then when they leave, we will have Skagway to ourselves. It's only about 800 people. Remember, the gateway to the north was Seattle. If you ever remember any of the tours I did down in Seattle, it was one publisher put in the newspaper, Seattle is the way to the Klondike, even though, I mean, we're still 600 kilometers south of the Klondike here. So people would rush out to Seattle and they would get on a ship, including the mayor of Seattle. They sailed north into Skagway and then they would climb up normally the Chilkoot Trail. That's the famous image of everyone climbing the hills. And then they get to Lake Bennett. Well, I could tell you today, if we went to Lake Bennett, I can show you every tree there is about 126 years old. And that's because 126, no, Paula, after 126 years ago, the miners cut down every tree along Lake Bennett so they could sail up or float up the Yukon River. But just south of us, where we're going to do a quick morning hike, is Miles Canyon. Well, Miles Canyon is old basalt. This is old volcanic territory around here. So totally different rock, which is why, of course, you can find gold. They sailed up to there, and the rapids were so big they looked like the mane of a white horse running. Well, it's very early in the morning, Susan. Here it's just 7 a.m. and there's only 28,000 people here, and it's below freezing. And uh, so they named it Whitehorse because the Whitehorse Rapids. Well, the first year, several miners crashed and drowned. So when the police, the Northwest Mounted Police, they became famous because of Yukon here. They then controlled the border. They said you have to bring a year worth of supplies, and they made them walk their rafts around those rapids, and that became the establishment of Whitehorse. So Whitehorse was really second city forever because Dawson City is where they're heading. But by the 1950s, Dawson City's population fell to about 700, and they moved the capital down here. Until 1973, and I'll show it to you a little while on our walk. Until 1973, you would get on a paddle wheeler and you would sail from here up to Dawson City. And that's so much of the story. That was the last paddle wheeler that was in action, in actual public use in Canada. In 1973, they built the Klondike Highway. But the train would come all the way into this train station, all the way up till 1988. Now the train is just run for the cruise ships, and it just goes up to Carmack's, just at the border with Yukon, and turns around and goes down. So the train doesn't come here anymore, tragically. So we'll get back into some of that history, but I just want to show you this section here because since I was last here, Yukon has been very much one of these sections of one of these places where they're acknowledging, honoring, and respecting, of course, the residential school system where Indigenous children are ripped from their families. Like, look at this, the Whitehorse Indian Mission School, 1947 to 1960. Like, that's how recent all this is. And just these, see, there you go, Yukoners are on their bikes going off to work, getting up in the morning. But this is representative of a healing circle. So when people would get together here and sit around and talk about, be honest about their feelings and the abuse that they went through. The residential school system in Canada is a crime against humanity. And so this totem up here is actually officially a healing totem. So so it's just, of course, it's those of you who've known me for a long time I want to be part of reconciliation and this acknowledgement. Um, and it is meaningful and powerful. And so here we have, and this is the other thing. One thing is to have peace. The next thing is what is the path forward. And so here's where you start to have the conversation about the path forward. So here's the healing totem rests on the traditional territories of the Kwalendon First Nation and the Taquachin Council. So this is, I think, very, very important. And if I just have a little look over here, you'll see a few of these signs. So there's the sign for Yukon, and there's Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. You're all very welcome to Google that and read that at some point, because it is a lovely totem. And yeah, so that's another long story, which is one that I've never been afraid to tackle and keep going on. And I need to. I come from settler roots, and that's important. Now, here's the old train tracks, and this is this narrow gauge, and it was a 3-foot gauge. And of course, the construction of it. Keep in mind, I mean, I've always been in love with the gold rush history and the mining history for many, many reasons. And part of it is, of course, people came up here quite desperately, as you can imagine. The gold rush story can go all the way back, in my opinion, to the early 1500s in South America with the conquistadores, of course, going to sea, but in a Turtle Island sense of history. Hiya, Hannah. In a Turtle Island sense of history, of course, the first great rush was 1849, created San Francisco. That was on the back, of course, the Great Hunger in Ireland. Excuse me. And so, a long process there. Then those same gold miners move up and they find gold in Fisherville and Barkerville, which gives birth to the territory of New Caledonia, which then fuses with Vancouver Island to become British Columbia, right? And that's the birth of that as a province, a colony, and then a province. And then they come all the way up here and they find the biggest gold. I mean, by 1900, they had taken out 100 million ounces. And so, well, thank you, Karen. I hope I'm not fearless in that. I think it's just important to, but that's what leads to the birth of this whole north here. But what happens with it? And by the way, you still know you're in modern Canada here. See, wonderful pride flag, very inclusive. That's the thing about the north. The north, in my opinion, is rarely very intolerant, because anyone who manages to live through winter with eternal darkness and everything all kind of keep together. And so there's this great sense of partnership. Now, a lot to talk about here. Um, there we go. This is talking about the arrival of the Alaska Highway. Friday, April 3rd, 1942, marked as the arrival of the first American military in Whitehorse for the construction of the Alaska Highway. That as well, and I could play songs for you about the Alaska Highway. 20,000 curves on it or something. I mean, it's just incredible. It leaves from Dawson Creek, northern British Columbia, and it ends up at Delta Junction. But if you really want to go to the end of it, you go all the way down to Homer, Alaska. And then you turn around and you drive all the way down to Ushuaia in Argentina. Now, here is the Yukon Quest. I know one person who's done it several times. I did when I was doing my master's years ago in Vancouver. I came back up here in the winter and dog sledded for 2 weeks, which was quite an experience, camping at -50. By the way, Yukon is considered quite mild, believe it or not, for an Arctic environment. However, it does have the lowest recorded temperature ever in Canada, the United States, and it was 1957, I think, in a place called Snag, -63 degrees Celsius, maybe about -75 Fahrenheit. But yeah, this quest goes up to Fairbanks and back. Of course, you've all probably familiar with the Iditarod Trail in Alaska, the famous one. They have to move the start of that one because of snow. Um, Up to the north, I just need to show you in the distance. I'll just use the zoom. There's snow-capped peaks up there. Although it's going to get warm today, maybe it can get quite warm. We're going to get up to 11 or 12 degrees. It can be surprisingly warm. It's meant to be sunny the next few days, and so there's But there you go. On August 17th, I don't know if you can read this very well. August 17th, 1896, George Carmack and 2 Indian companions, Skookum Jim and Dawson Charlie, discovered gold in the Klondike. Now, they think that Skookum means strong, probably found it, but George Carmack was the one who registered the claim, um, because they wouldn't let an Indigenous person do so, right? But it was this great rush, and don't worry, I'm going to go up. I have put up day after tomorrow a tour. I'm going to take my friends gold panning. One of my buddies with me here, my friend Rod, you might have seen him. He did the cold plunge with me at -22. he's the guy who's climbed mountains with me and all sorts of things, and always wanted to come see the north. And so we just thought, got this opportunity. There is the light just coming up. By the way, again, modern northern Canada. So you'll see the hospital across the way, but it's the sky up here when you get to the far north. We're moving into the longest days of the year now. And so the sun just kind of moves around up and over us. So there was a kind of sunset. It dipped below the visual line at 10:30 or something yesterday, whereas tonight it'll be up the whole time. Justina, I have planned for gold so many times, and my entire earning is still like so much less than even 1 ounce. That's the thing about gold. It's really, really hard to find. I did manage to make it out to Tim Hortons this morning, which isn't my first choice, but to get a coffee. And then I'm going to go and wake everybody up. We said we're going to leave at 8 a.m. And start driving north. There'll be no traffic on the road. I mean, once we get to Dawson, even though it's one of the most famous cities in the world, it's under 2,000 people. Here's just a monument to firefighters. And firefighters are really important, well, the world over, but particularly in these sort of societies. And I say that because of course, everything was built with wood, and it all shifts and moves, and people still have independent oil heating for some of their houses, which is pretty expensive. Do you know the average house price of a detached home in Yukon is nearly $700,000? It's the thing about the North, as life is not cheaper. Um, no, Nat, I'm not guiding people. I'm with a couple of friends who've just always wanted to come up north. So this is not a tour. This is just I've been trying to come back here all through the pandemic and everything. And Whitehorse is lovely. Whitehorse is neat to see. I'm glad to share it, but it's Dawson City that is the living museum. And it is a living museum. It was the biggest city in 1898, 1899. It was the biggest city west of Winnipeg and north of Seattle. Um, and I do too, Karen. Karen's just saying she loves statues honoring true heroes. But I do want to show you a few other things while I'm here. So Whitehorse has the territorial government, and the territorial government, I think, has 9 members. There's also First Nations government through here. We went off upon arrival and went and saw the fish ladder. The fish are not running right now, but keep in mind that the Yukon River, which starts to the south of us here, Bennett Lake over in British Columbia, the lake's right along the ridge where you look down into Alaska, down towards Skagway. It flows for roughly 3,800 kilometers and empties out into the Bering Sea. Like, that's how massive that river is. Another one of the great river systems of the world. Now have a look at this mural over here. So that is an image of the miners heading up the Chilkoot Trail. That was the pass from Daye, which is right across from Skagway, and they would climb up to there. Thanks, Marcia. And they would climb up that pass, and it took them something like 18 trips to bring all the supplies that they were required to bring up by the Northwest Mounted Police. Remember, here in Yukon, the whole thing was governed basically by the Northwest Mounted Police, who become the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They taxed them 20% at the border, but in the entire gold rush up here, down in Skagway, was actually, I'm going to walk the other way, was totally lawless. Inside the territory, the vast territory, there were 5 murders during the gold rush, and they caught all 5 murderers, and that is why the Mountie always gets his man. That's the origin of that phrase. Now, dotted through here, you see some buildings like this little one's run down. Doing business in the north is hard. We went out for an excellent Sayuri, hola. Hello, my dear friend. I'm glad to see you here. Everyone, we have a celebrity on board. We have Sayuri from Salvador de Bahia in Brazil. Sayuri, it's a little bit cooler up here than it is in Brazil. Okay, I'm 800 kilometers from the Arctic Circle right now, but I will be 200 kilometers from there in a little while. Now, this is the building. I just want to get across the street because I have to show you a building going back all the way to the 1950s. And this isn't something you see every day, but they call this the log cabin skyscraper. And this is the first big building. By the way, you see power wires and everything above ground a lot in the north because the ground's frozen. But see that? There is a 3-story log cabin right there. So you know you're in the land of frontier. Um, and the problem is, as a bit of a warning, there's probably a 3-story outhouse as well. So pick your story very correctly. Um, it was that dodgy fella in front of me. Look at him. He's just waving to say, and then there's old Northwest Tell. I'd say in the old days when I worked up here, I would really say goodbye. It was very hard. I used to buy phone cards for $20, and it would be $1 a minute to make a call. It was a different world. It was an isolated world. But of course, coming out of this whole tradition of Yukon is, of course, many of you are familiar with Jack London. He comes up north less than a year, gets scurvy, finds no gold, and goes home and writes 120 stories about it. And then once we turned down from the airport yesterday and drove into town, we drove down Robert Service Way. And I might even, because we're going to Lake Labarge this morning, um, and I got to say, I'm pretty tempted to jump into Lake Labarge. Might do it driving down in a couple of days' time, because we're going to drive down. We're going to spend 2 nights up in Dawson, which will be enough for my friends, because they'll see everything, but I could spend a week up there. But then we're going to come down and spend a night here again, and then drive down to Skagway, Alaska for 2 nights. So here, I'll give you another view of the multi-story log cabin right there. Isn't that wonderful? Um, Now, remember, up in the north, like when you're just wandering through town, it's actually more spread out than it looks. People earn good money up here because they also get northern allowance, which you get in Canada when you live up in the far north. But northern allowance here is a bit easier because there is a road, because you can get in a road and drive all the way down to, Edmonton or wherever. Then supplies aren't too much more expensive. So many other northern communities are isolated. There's only one in Yukon. Hi, Jolene. Um, well, actually, Jolene, I love this. I'm not heading north to Alaska. I'll be heading south to Alaska. I love that from Whitehorse. It takes 2 hours to drive down to Skagway, Alaska, through British Columbia. Hey, I want to show you this pillar up here. See this log cabin on stilts? That, ladies and gentlemen, is called a cache. C-A-C-H-E. You still see it behind people's homes in rural Yukon and rural Alaska and rural territories. And so the metal at the base, this one's obviously just for display, but that's to stop squirrels and things climbing up. But that's how you would actually keep your food in the back. So cache is an old French term, and it's used everywhere where I live as well, because of course so many of the settlers and explorers were French speaking. So it's not for hen snow; it's where you keep your supplies for the winter or the summer, just above ground. Particularly in the winter, it's cold enough that you wouldn't need to worry about worry about things going off. But as we do come up over here, there is a statue of bighorn sheep. I'm really hoping that we're going to see obviously some bears. Do you know, way up in Dawson City, same river, we're following Yukon the whole way up. When they used to drive those paddle wheelers up the river, people would stand at the front with long wooden poles to see where the sandbars had shifted in the river because the water volumes changed so much. But I'm hoping to see some, yeah, particularly bears. I've seen otters way up north. They're big moose territory. When we go south, we might be able to see the Dall sheep, which would be a fun thing. But here we go. This is a monument called Under the Midnight Sun. If you're unfamiliar with the term the Midnight Sun, that's, of course, these places in the far north where the sun doesn't set. So this building over here is the Yukon government. And so they even have a political party system. They have one member in the federal government. And again, representing 45,000 people. There's ridings in Greater Toronto that represent 150,000. But hey, what you going to do? You got to represent the territories. So keep in mind, Canada has 10 provinces and 3 territories. The third one, of course, came into being in 1999, and that's Nunavut. But the Yukon shape is kind of triangular, and it's quite a logical shape to it, because it follows the line of mountains. So, and if this weather is really going to hold the next couple of days, when we get up north, we're going to see really the tail end of the huge Rocky Mountain Trench that I talk so much about down where I live. But down in the southeast corner of this territory is the Liard River. Very hard to get there because there's no roads, but that's really the start of the whole system of Canadian Rockies. Now, a lot more murals in town, but I want to come and just try and show you the paddle wheeler in the distance. So I have put up for noon my time. Hi, Arlene. Hey, Ellen. Um, but I have put up noon my time, which I think is like 8 UK on I guess tomorrow, a tour in Dawson City, and that's please feel free to just share that with as many people as possible because it's just one of those places that are very hard to get to. Um, there's the dog sledding is a huge part of the tradition out here, and that Yukon Quest race is an amazing experience. It's not for me. I mean, it is hard work. Um, but the people who do take care of the dogs, they just love it. Um, Here we are. By the way, they have a dog on the flag up here, the flag of Yukon. And of course, in the winter, you traveled by dog sled. Although it was funny, I called up a story that I had vaguely remembered. Here's the Yukon. Look at that. I used to like it when they used to say the magic and the mystery. These are all wild roses right out here. They're not budding yet, but we were finding crocuses yesterday on a side of the hill up where we did a hike because they're facing the sun and they get the sun like 18 or 20 hours a day right now, right? Which is, pretty fantastic. And it was fun. I could turn over in the night and just the corner of my eyes, I'd see the light coming through around the curtains. I love it. I love the midnight sun. Now winter is a different thing. And talking about the diversity up here, so we went to a really cool restaurant called Antoinette's last night, and the gentleman who clearly runs it, in fact, I'm going to put up an excellent 5-star review for him, was Chilean, right? I mean, that's how diverse we are. And so, of course, you and I were reminiscing about Chile. He was from a place called Temuco in the center south, which is a really cool place. It's a very indigenous part of Chile. And we had like fabulous international cuisine. There you have the North Dragon restaurant here. But like I say, everything in Whitehorse is a little bit easier because you have the big highway that comes in. To drive from here home to Banff is, gosh, I have looked at it before. It's 2 days basically of driving, if you're driving hard. Probably take 3 if you're going at an easier phase. So I want to get you as far as the SS Klondike. Now, it's not open yet, unfortunately. That's one of the original paddle wheelers, and it's run by Parks Canada. There's also a ski hill out in the distance. So they've got everything up here. A number of years ago, they hosted the Canada Games, Canada Sports Games up here. And that developed a lot more infrastructure, which is really nice. Because in the winter, sure nice to have an indoor swimming pool. And this is so true of the Scandinavian countries as well. Places where you're living with an awful lot of darkness. You really have to come up with as many activities as possible. It's going to have a little look at this platform. So here's the train tracks once again from the White Pass train system. Gosh, it must have been exciting. But I just wanted to finish the story. These are whiskey flats down here. And I see. From 1900, when the White Pass and Yukon Railway established the town site of Whitehorse, the company owned the land along the riverfront. So it was the early layout. And Robert Service, so the famous poet, There Are Strange Things Done in the Midnight Sun, and a bunch of the boys were whooping it up in the Malamute Saloon. He worked in a bank up here in Whitehorse. But Whitehorse was small. It was just a junction point to try and get north. And so then it's only taken off the last 50 or 60 years into a large area. And again, in terms of the economy, the broader economy, there's still a lot of mining up here. So you have government, you have mining, tourism, but it's a short season. And it's a real challenge because they don't have a lot of tour coach companies up here. We used to have to bring buses in from Alaska to make this all happen. So that is Robert Service Way going out of town. And up on the bluff at the back is where the airport is. If you remember back those tragic events on 9/11, and they closed the American airspace, a full Korean airliner ended up coming up to landing here on an airstrip that technically is not long enough for one, but there was no other choice. So there's the old Klondike. So the story that we were reading yesterday is a group of men who were in Dawson City and had made it quite wealthy from gold back in the early 1900s. Now, keep in mind, we've got the playoffs going on now. We're going to have to stop everything tonight to watch the hockey game, which is Vancouver, Edmonton, of course, all very exciting for us here. But back in those days, you would challenge for the Stanley Cup. So Lord Stanley Cup, hence Stanley Park and all of that. You would challenge for the cup. I don't know, I just go across the street anyway. Um, they would challenge for it. So this group from Dawson City, the Nuggets, the Dawson City Nuggets, went to challenge Ottawa for the Stanley Cup. Oh, LM, there are both Grizzlies and Black Bears. Everyone's so polite up here too, because nobody's in a rush. So these guys took they dog sledded down to Whitehorse, although apparently two of the team members rode their bicycles on the frozen river. That's fun stuff to read about as well. Then they got down here and the train was late because of a storm. They got down to Skagway, missed the ferry by 2 hours, had to wait 5 days, and then took a ship all the way down to Vancouver, but because of fog, they couldn't land there. They went to Seattle, then they had to travel back up, took a train across Canada, and challenged Ottawa. The Ottawa Senators at the time was the greatest hockey team, and they lost one game 23-2 or something. And one guy scored 15 goals, it's the most goals ever scored in an NHL or in a Stanley Cup game. But I mean, pretty amazing experience. There's the SS Klondike here, and Klondike comes from Klondike, and it is a tributary of the Yukon River in the north, and that's where the gold rush is. And famous Ogilvy predicted they would find the gold up there. So this is what travel was like. So much. Yeah, I know, it's crazy to bike down the river. This is what travel was like all through the west, particularly of this part of the world. When Diane and I were in Kamloops, I was talking to her about that when they had the Caribou Gold Rush, 1860s, up in central British Columbia, they couldn't bring these ships up the Fraser River because the flow was so powerful. And so therefore, people had to walk on the Caribou Trail. They'd take a boat up to Hope or up to Yale. They would walk over the pass, and then they'd get on these mighty ships here and sail up the lakes and the rivers. And this was, so you would have come up to here, you would have gone up, taken a ship up to Skagway, taken the train up to here, and then you would have boarded one of these boats and taken, I think, 3.5 days one way and 2.5 the other, or maybe even 4.5. I'm going to have to read that again. And that would be the flow to come up, going with or against the river, and it depends what time of year. And then when it freezes up in the winter, then of course it was dog sledding. So 1973, they built the Klondike Highway, and that's the end of the paddle wheeler tradition. But growing up like around Calgary, they still run one at Heritage Park. So it really was. And here, oh, by the way, for everyone interested, there's the famous red chairs, because this is again Parks Canada. I also want to show in the distance, there's the little ski hill out there, community run ski hill. Pretty neat thing to have. So the river boats, there's a lot of story here. So today we're going to basically stop at every hike along the little viewpoints of where these used to run. So if you had lived along a riverboat route 100 years ago, you'd have known the sound of each boat's whistle. You'd listen for the first boat arriving each spring, bringing supplies. You'd waited through the winter. So, and imagine this is what the docks, Dawson City up there. So I will take you around those docks, of course, tomorrow. Give you a little sense. So here is a map now of Yukon. So there it is. So bottom left is Kluane National Park. That's again the highest mountain in Canada. This is Miles Canyon. This is where they saw the rapids. They said are like the main of a Whitehorse. And then Watson Lake is if you take the highway all the way down into northern BC. And Old Crow up here, in any meaningful way, is the only town in Yukon that doesn't have road access, but there's some of the oldest archaeological sites in North America all the way up there. So today, we're going to drive from here up to Dawson City. Right? And this is the top of the World Highway. It's paved to the border. On the Alaska side, it's not paved. You drive up and over and you get to Chicken, Alaska. I don't think they start plowing that road until the 15th of the month. And from a First Nations point of view, it gives you a sense of the different linguistic groups that you have here. And people have lived here, well, for thousands of years. Like I say, overall, a more moderate climate for an Arctic climate. I mean, I'm not going to pretend it's not the far, far, far north. It is continental as well, even though there is the Beaufort Sea way to the north. Because these mountains are to the south, it doesn't. It's it's really a dry, northern climate. We're up at about 700 meters right now, 2,000 feet. The drive, Nat, the drive up to Dawson City, if you don't stop, is 6 hours. Say we're gonna leave at 8 and probably get there at 5 or 6 today. Past some tiny communities, but I don't know. I was trying to Google to see what was open, but I just couldn't see anything. So we're just going to get some snacks. Um, but yeah, if you leave Dawson City to go to the border, you have to take a ferry over the river. So I'll be interested because if the river isn't broken up, the ferry's not running. And then you drive up to Boundary, up to the border. Pretty neat border. It's like one Canadian, one American sitting there stamping people's passports. Um, but you eventually then, so it's only about an hour and a half, I think, to get up to the border. But then it's about 4 hours down to Tok. Tok, Alaska stands for Tokyo Crossing. That was, again, the building of the Alaska Highway during World War II. See, everything's coming to life now. There's school buses out there. Just as a side note, just to mention, my little Finn I'm going to his graduation on May 31st, even though he's not quite done school at that point. So I'm so happy to be home for that. So this is the SS Klondike Art Project. And I didn't realize they were doing great big renos on the Klondike because I have toured that boat many times. But I say I haven't been, the last time I was here was 2006. So certainly I'm going to see a lot more written about reconciliation, which is pretty important. Look at the light across the mighty river now. That's that northern sky where you really feel like you feel the curvature of the earth out here. Now it's pretty magical. There's still some snow and ice out there, but already I'm convinced, well, I still see my breath, probably right on freezing. It was -2 according to the car this morning. This is exactly like the cool I feel in Banff in the morning. Like it's that dry, very easy to withstand. Like it's not a tough cold. And like I say, the coldest temperature I've recorded is -63 degrees. And that's out by Kluane there, out near Beaver Creek. And then, but here, yeah, they can get up in late May, early June. I think their record temperature was 36 degrees. There is the big propeller of the paddle wheeler. Can you imagine building these boats and building them to run these rivers where your volumes change just enormously? They have a maximum speed because as the paddle wheels turn at the back, if they go too fast, they just turn up and they're kicking foam. Now, again, I don't know enough about that stuff, but when I've been on these trips with engineers, they can explain that kind of thing to me, which is pretty neat. So here we are, the mighty vessel. No need for barges. The SS Klondike II was the crowning achievement of the riverboat design of British Columbia Navigation Company's fleet. She was powerful and large enough to carry heavy loads of silver, lead, ore, and freight without the need to push a barge for extra cargo space. Amazing. But this gives you a sense of where this river actually goes. If you follow the Yukon all the way out, Fairbanks, Alaska is actually up on the Chena River, which is a tributary of the Tanana. And the Tanana is the largest glacial-fed river in the whole wide world. But just the construction of these things. I mean, it's just, and most of it, trying to work it out, a lot of people without necessarily a huge amount of education. So there's the back of the paddle wheel. Look at that. And so people would have sat out on deck, and of course, the light wouldn't go down. I remember everything in the north in those days was incredibly expensive. You were spending for a night in a hotel in Dawson City what you could stay a month in New York City with, right? That was that reality. And if you've been on a tour in Canmore, Alberta with me, you maybe have seen this, but this is the sign for the Trans-Canada Trail. Same trail, walking, biking all across this country. So what I'm going to do, I put a graffiti, but I'm just going to come down along the river. It is 7:38, and I told everyone that we would be heading out at 8 o'clock this morning. So I'm going to have to rush back and throw the bag in. We're staying in just like a guest house, which is fun. But we are going to stay in the downtown hotel in Dawson City, which means tonight we are going to join the Sourtoe Club. Now, if you don't know this story, I'm going to tell it to you very quickly, okay? So the Sourtoe cocktail, I'm not making this up. We get a shot. You can have anything you want. You should have a shot of Yukon Jack whiskey. It's about 50% alcohol and sugar. It's terrible. You got to drink a pint of water with it. But into that, they drop, oh, hi, John. They drop a human toe. I'm not kidding, because they have a collection of human toes that have frozen off people's feet. They keep them preserved on salt. Um, and you drink back the shot, and the toe touches your lips. And then you join the Sourtoe Society. And that is because this little shack here, lovely bit of public art, gives you a northern feel. But that is because when you're new to the north, you're a Chichaco. And then when you're an old timer, you become a sourdough. And that's because they soured on the Yukon, but they didn't have the dough to leave. But also, they traveled up from San Francisco with the sourdough. So there's this connection to the gold rush down there, to the gold rush up here. So it just has to be done. So my buddies will be into it. So, oh, hi, Danny. Good morning to you. Sorry if I've missed anyone. I'm quite caught up in being back here. And and as I flew up here, I kept singing to myself, I'm long gone to the Yukon. Those northern lights I want to see. Long, long gone to the Yukon, boys. The Yukon is calling to me. Oh, it's a toe. I've seen it. You could Google it a couple of years ago. Someone swallowed it. They had to wait to get it back. But there we are. So Whitehorse is waking up now. Ça fait tellement plaisir. I'm looking so forward to going through some of the communities. Good morning. Um, the communities that are up along the river today. Hey, Sean, there you are. Hi there, buddy. It's nice to connect with you, my friend. Sean, I was just in Vancouver, and I only did one little video just at the Laughing Statue because they all have their Canucks jerseys on. But when I was taking Diane around, we went the last morning around the university and went out through Carrisdale where he used to live. Thanks for connecting, buddy. Yes, keep your eyes peeled. Sean and I, Marcia, we might have to drink it on camera. Yeah, I'm sure they'd let us do a little video of it. You can order it minus toe, but yeah, then you go for the whole foot though, which is that could cause a lot of choking. All right, ladies and gentlemen, there's a bunch more murals. I might try and do another video. Oh, I wanted to mention one more thing about this. You're welcome, Danny, and I do. There's obviously a link in the description if you're able to make a contribution. It's much appreciated. I do, for what it's worth, really appreciate the contributions on these sort of trips because I'm obviously paying for all this out of my own pocket. But I just promised my friends I'd bring them up here, followed by a screech. The screeching in, what Paul was talking about there, that's off in Newfoundland, and that was the bottom of the barrels of the rum that came up from the Caribbean. But the other thing is the Pioneer Cemetery. We walked around it last night, and you'd see these people, from New South Wales, Australia, die in 1902, like people trying to come up and find their wells. But there are something like 100 nameless graves there. And it goes to show what it was like when people tried to come up. Hi, Roberta. Hi, merci. When people, tried to come up here, when you're totally ill prepared. When they promoted the gold rush, they sort of said, "Oh, you'll go up to Klondike, and you'll just find chunks of gold." But of course, winter hits in a place that drops to minus 50, and no food, right? Because you don't even know how to hunt. I mean, the fascinating history, but the tragedy of that kind of desperation is something else. So, all right, everyone. Well, from the great north, but I'm going a lot further north today. But from Whitehorse in the Yukon, I just want to say peace and love. And you see that it's an educated government town, loads of people out on their bikes. But I'm going to go over, jump in the car, and go grab my friends, and we're going to go to Wilderness. So, you can ask my friend Diane. I've got some really nice, Diane was really lucky and met some of my dear friends on our trip here in Western Canada. So this is the kind of stuff we go to. Wow, this is the kind of things I do with my spare time. And then I'm back to Europe in a couple of weeks, so it all gets busy again. All right, everyone, lots of love. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for coming to the gorgeous, gorgeous Yukon with me. See you soon.